I've kept a watchful eye over my fanbase, across all the comments I get and the reception of every video, and I know exactly what they want. It's a Dragon Ball FighterZ tutorial, of course! This game has been out for some time now, and it's quickly become one of my all-time favorites. Even as the game carries on in its third season of DLC, I still find myself routinely recommending this game to people. It's also been going on sale fairly often, so that's something to keep in mind for all the people that don't own this game yet. I've been teaching my friend TheRedhotcbt how to play the game, and the one thing we both struggled with is blocking. I know how to block, and I can explain it to him, but it wasn't really clicking for him. Either he's a smooth-brained pencil eater that has done nothing but cheat at every game he plays, or it's just really hard to understand without a visual aid. Well, I'd bet that the former is true. If it does end up being the latter for him or anyone else out there, hopefully this video will suffice. This is a very basic guide, so more experienced players likely won't get much out of this other than the satisfaction of hearing my beautiful voice and dope AF music choices. This tutorial will assume that you know the absolute basics, meaning that you've either played the game and have gone through its very rudimentary tutorial, or have, at the very least, watched some 3-year-old video explaining the basic mechanics of the game. I'll be going over strictly how to defend, but learning how to attack is just as important. I think there's already a plethora of good tutorials for combos, but I may make one anyway if this video ends up helping anyone. Oh, and some of the footage I'll be using is from matches between my brother and I done over Wi-Fi because of good ol' COVID. We're used to playing locally, so that's just a heads up. If these matches look a little jank, we're still getting used to the lag. Anyways, on with the tutorial. Before we can even get into blocking moves, I think it's important to take a look at fighting game notation. It looks incredibly complicated, but is actually pretty simple. So let's start with this. 5L. What does this mean exactly? Well, the 5 actually refers to the direction being held. We use numbers to describe what direction you'll need to hold down. Weird, I know, I didn't come up with the rules. Specifically, we use numpad notation. So take a good long look at your keyboard's numpad. To describe holding down, we'd use the number 2. Forward would be the number 6. Up and behind you would be 7. You get the idea. 5 specifically refers to no direction being held. This assumes that you're facing right. If you're facing left, you'd mirror these inputs. The L refers to the button, in this case, the light attack button. I'll use a PS4 controller as an example, as it's what I use. If you play on Xbox or Switch, I feel like it shouldn't be hard to just translate the buttons. For the face buttons, we have L for light attack, M for medium attack, H for heavy attack, and S for special attack, although I tend to refer to this as the key blast button. The shoulder buttons on the right side act as shortcuts for L and M, and H and S. The shoulder buttons on the left side are our assist buttons. These are technically referred to as A1 and A2, although I've often found people will just ignore this notation and spell out the character and assist as they write out a combo. Still probably worth keeping in mind, but you won't see it that much. So, 5L means we press the light attack button while the D-pad isn't held in any direction. 6H refers to pressing forward and the heavy attack button. Now for something a little more advanced, 236L. This refers to those quarter circle motions you see in the special moves list. We input the directions and then the button. 2 for down, 3 down and forward, and 6 forward, then the light button. 3M would refer to holding down and forward and pressing the medium attack button. 214H would refer to pressing down, back, and then the heavy attack button. Hopefully this explanation makes sense. It seems kinda complicated at first, but if you make the connection enough times that this number means this direction, you'll get used to it. Oh, and a J dot means that the move was performed in the air, or while jumping, hence the letter J. Now with that out of the way, let's get down to the basics. On the ground there are 2 ways to block. To block while standing, just hold back. To block while crouching, hold down and back. Certain moves will require you to take a specific stance while blocking. Let's look at some examples. If Goku does his 2M, he does this kick. We need to be crouching in order to block this move. If you try to block it while standing, you'll get hit. We call these moves lows. Looking at Goku again, if he does his 6M, he does this attack. If we try to block it while crouching, we'll get hit. We'll need to be standing to block this move. These moves are typically called overheads, but for consistency's sake and because it's my video, I'll be referring to these moves as highs. I don't know, maybe it will catch on, probably not. Not all moves are either low or high. Most moves in this game can actually be blocked in either stance. If you're in the air, you can block any move, lows and highs included, by simply holding back. So how do you deal with lows and highs? Well, interestingly, I have to bring up the average human reaction time. See, it's not physically possible to react to everything flawlessly. The average human reaction time to a visual stimulus is about a quarter of a second, or about 15 frames in a 60 frames per second game. This is a genetic thing too, so you can't really fix this. Thankfully, FighterZ is merciful enough to work around this human limitation. Most low attacks in this game fall below the threshold of human reaction time, such as Super Saiyan Goku's 2M, which is 14 frames. Most high attacks are above the human reaction time, such as Goku's 236L, which is frames. As with every rule, there are a few exceptions, such as Hit, whose only low attack is 27 frames. So generally, it's a good idea to block low by default and block up when you see a high attack coming. You can typically tell what attacks hit low and high by their animations, but I'll actually have a section in the video coming up where I'll show all of the low and high moves in the game, so you won't have to worry about that. Also, most aerial attacks hit high. There actually is a better method of dealing with high-low mix-up, but I'll get into that later on as I talk about Blockstrings, as I think that concept is a little more advanced, but definitely still important to learn for beginners. Another thing you have to look out for is grabs. Many characters have command grabs that you need to watch out for. If we look at Piccolo and do his 5S, he throws his arm out and grabs the opponent. This grab will get you regardless of if you're standing or crouching. However, it will miss you if you're in the air. That's because this grab only works against grounded opponents. If Piccolo does his 2S, he shoots his arm upwards. This will snatch you out of the air, but will miss you if you're on the ground. That's because this grab is only effective against airborne opponents. Not all characters have command grabs, but Dragon Rush, performed with L and M, is a universal option that acts just like a grab. To avoid Dragon Rushes, you can either jump out of the way, or press any button just as they're about to hit you to tech it. It will cause this cool looking animation to play, and it will put you both back in neutral. As for the button you should press, I prefer to tech Dragon Rushes with a Dragon Rush of my own, but really it's a preference thing. Now coming up is the long section where I show off how to defend against every move in this game. Don't worry about memorizing all of this yet, you'll likely want to come back to this later as you improve. Still, I think it's worth putting here before I get into some of the more advanced concepts. So let's begin. In this section I'll be showing what moves hit low and high. Then I'll show off all the command grabs. Any moves not shown here can be blocked in either stance. Oh, and also, they've changed some move properties via patches, and we've got a new character on the way, so check the description for potential updates. Hopefully I get around to updating it. Anyway, here's the list. Alright, now with that out of the way, we should get into some slightly more advanced stuff. When you successfully block a move, you're put in a state called Blockstun. The number of frames of Blockstun you're put in depends on the move you blocked. While in this state, your options are incredibly limited. If you have meter, you can press forward and the assist button to switch in another character and force your opponent off you. This is a very effective tool if used sparingly. It's an incredibly effective way of getting your opponent off you and forcing them to be a little more careful with how they construct their block strings. I say it should be used sparingly because it costs a bar and also forces you to switch out your character, which you might not have wanted to do, unless you've only got one character left. Also, your opponent can absolutely fucking obliterate you if they see it coming and are prepared for it. You can also use your Sparking Blast by pressing L, M, H, and S, but this should be your last resort. Sparking Blast becomes more effective the less characters you have, so it's usually wise to save it until you really need it, since you can only use it once per match. Aside from these two options, you only have one other way to act out of Blockstun, and that's if you block Ki Blasts. You may have noticed that you can Super Dash through Ki Blasts. If you block Ki Blasts, you can immediately cancel it into a Super Dash or a Reflect. Just like the guard cancel example, if you become predictable with this, your opponent can punish you, so keep that in mind. That's going to be a theme with the rest of this video. Lastly, something important to keep in mind is that while in Blockstun, you cannot be grabbed. This means that you can't be forced into a grab. If we look back at some characters that have a 5LLL grab, like Broly, look closely. Broly's hands are out for the grab, but the opponent is still in Blockstun, so it whiffs. Majin Buu gives us an even better visual, as we can see his opponent still crouching from blocking his 5LL when the grab comes out. This also means that if you make your opponent block a move and then want to grab them, you'll need a big enough gap for them to come out of Blockstun, and once their Blockstun has worn off, they can tech your Dragon Rush or jump to avoid your command grab. And with this talk of gaps, I figure now is a good time as any to talk about Blockstrings. It's absolutely essential that you know how these work. One, so you know how to pressure your opponent, and more importantly, so you know when to attack. All this talk of reacting to highs and lows is all good in training mode, but in actual matches, even the very best players get hit all the time. You can't block forever, and thankfully you don't have to. Now more than ever, in fact, as Season 3 introduced some changes that killed self-sustaining block strings. Let's back up and break all this down. Most block strings adhere to the basic combo structure. It looks something like this. It goes aerials, light attacks, medium attacks, heavy attacks and Ki Blasts, special moves, and then supers, although you don't really see supers much in block strings. Now, think of each of these dividers as being a door that only opens in one direction. You can go through the door, but it closes and locks behind you, so you can do 5L into 5M into 5H, but you can't do 5H into 5M. You can do 5L into 5H into 236L, but you can't do 236L into 5M. This is vastly oversimplified, and it also varies from character to character, but for most characters it looks like this. This actually leads to that easier way of dealing with high-low mix-ups that I was talking about earlier. For example, assume you're fighting Trunks or Broly. Both of these characters only have one low attack, their 2M. Once you see the 2M come out, they've run out of low options, so you're safe to block high. If you're fighting a character like Tenshinhan or Kefla, you have to be more careful, as both of them have low special moves, which come very late in the block string. For most special moves, the amount of cooldown or time before another action can be taken is too long for them to continue pressure on their own. If I do Bardock's 236L, and then try to do his 5L, which is his fastest move, the opponent has enough time to attack me. Assists can bridge this gap. If I do Bardock's 236L, call Yamcha's assist, and do 5L, it will connect. Assists, assuming they give you enough block stun, allow you to jump back to a previous point in the sequence. Now, if you're fighting one of those characters with only one low, like Trunks, as they jump back in the sequence, they'll gain their low again. Keep this in mind. Also keep in mind that your assists are limited. Assists have a recovery time that needs to be waded through before they can be used again. They require a gap before they can start recovering, and as of Season 3, that gap needs to be fairly large. The only exception is in Sparking. While in Sparking, assists will begin to recover immediately after they are used, so it's important to keep track of your opponent's resources as well as your own. Their turn will end eventually. Eventually they'll run out of assists, and even if they're in Sparking, eventually that will wear off. Also, don't be too afraid to act. Gapless block strings usually don't last very long, and most of the scary block strings you see are full of holes where you can act. Let's take a look at my main boy Zamasu. Here's a simple, not at all optimal block string. You probably couldn't see it, but there's actually a 2-frame gap between the 5H and 2H. If we go into training mode and set the opponent to react with 4S, which is reflect, it'll come out between the 5H and 2H. That's because there's a gap between where the Blockstun from 5H ends and before 2H connects. You can also do a DP. DPs are moves with frame 1 invulnerability. I believe it stands for Dragon Punch, which is a reference to some other game, I think. I don't really know, to be honest. I won't be going over every DP now. Perhaps I will in another video if this video is received well. Some characters have a special move that acts like a DP, like Gohan or Super Saiyan Vegeta. A universal option is a level 3 super. DPs and their ensuing combos will deal all blue damage, so keep this in mind if your opponent has access to Sparking Blast or other characters. Also, I can't keep saying this enough, your opponent can punish you hard if you become predictable. DPs work because of their frame 1 invulnerability. As soon as Blockstun ends, you can do anything. And because you're invincible on the first frame, you'll power straight through your opponent's attack. The larger the gap you see between attacks, the more options you have. Just don't ever become predictable. There's counterplay to everything. Except this little cunt. Fuck him. Lastly, as you construct Blockstrings, something you'll want to pay attention to in training mode is this stat, called Frame Advantage. If you can't see it, go into your info display settings and turn on Attack Startup and Frame Advantage info. This number, as the name implies, shows your frame advantage. If the number is positive, it means how many frames you have until your opponent can act. If the number is negative, it means how many frames you have to wait through until you can act. Well, we literally reached the heat death of the universe before I could break down every single block situation in the game, so instead, here's just a little thing to keep in mind. Every character's fastest move is either their 5L or 2L. For almost every character, this move is 6 frames. There are only 4 exceptions: Nappa, 16, Broly, and Vegito. For all 4 of these characters specifically, their fastest move is actually 7 frames. You can glean this by looking at the attack startup, listed directly above the frame advantage. So what does this mean? Well, suppose I'm playing GT Goku and fighting Super Broly. I do a 236L which puts me at -3. This means that Broly can act 3 frames sooner than I can. So if I do my 5L, which is 6 frames, and Broly does his 2L, which is also 6 frames, Broly will win because his move landed 3 frames sooner than mine. If Broly tries to do his 5M instead, which is 15 frames, he'll lose. Even though he did his attack sooner than mine, his attack still comes out after mine. So, assuming the Broly player will want to do his 2L here, we won't have enough time to hit him, but we do have enough time to block him, reflect, or anything that we can do in sooner than 3 frames. GT Goku's 236L gives us a negative number, but is still safe on blocked, as we can act before our opponent can throw out their fastest move. Now, still looking at GT Goku, if we tried to do his 236S, we'd see that it leaves us at a disadvantage of 16 frames. So this doesn't even give us enough time to block. Even if Broly does his slow 5M, he'll still beat us by a frame. This move is not safe on block, as our opponent can act before we can block. So moves that are -5 or greater are safe on block. Moves that are -6 frames are safe against the Fantastic Four, whose fastest move is 7 frames, but unsafe against everyone else. Moves that are -7 or less are generally universally unsafe on block. You'll want to check with your character what moves are and are not safe on block. Oh, and this is also the main reason you won't see supers in Blockstrings, as, with few exceptions, supers are usually horrendously unsafe on block. What about moves that don't give us a negative number? Well, moves that are 0 are totally neutral. This means that both players can act at the exact same time. 6M is universal between all characters and gives a frame advantage of 0. Now what about moves that give us a positive number? Well, we call these moves plus on block. These aren't as common, generally. Moves that are plus on block always have some amount of startup that prevents them from being put into gapless solo block strings. However, assists can make them work. Bardock's 236S has lots of startup, but when the move lands it is +4 on block. So, if we go back to fighting Super Broly, even though he successfully blocked the move, we can still act 4 frames sooner than him. So our 5L, which is Bardock's fastest move, will beat his 2L. Broly still has 2 frames before our 5L hits, however, so he still has access to his frame 1 options, including a DP. Anyways, that about does it for me, except it doesn't because I totally forgot to talk about Vanish. XD. By pressing M and H, you can teleport behind your opponent. Nothing personnel, kid. It costs a bar and is +2 on block. So your opponent has 4 frames, 5 if you're one of the 4, to act. Not enough for 5L, but enough to reflect, DP, and also backstep, which is something I've neglected to mention until now. You can cancel normals with a Vanish at any time. The only exception is 6M. You can cancel special moves as well, but they need to connect with something before you can vanish, so With a Vanish, moves like GT Goku's 236S suddenly become safe. This is yet another option you and your opponent have in Blockstrings, but like everything, it's not unbeatable. It costs a bar and you will eventually run out of meter. Anyways, that's the absolute basics of defense. I know it seems like a lot, and it kind of is a lot, but just take it slow and don't be discouraged if you have some trouble at first. Hell, even the very best players get hit all the time, so don't worry about it. You shouldn't aim to block everything flawlessly, although if you can manage to do that, good on you. Rather, you should understand these mechanics enough that every time you block incorrectly, you can learn from it. Hopefully that made sense. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial, I hope this inspires you to practice and learn the game more, and I hope you begin to start blocking correctly. There is so much more to defense than just what was listed here. These are just the absolute basics. There are plenty of things I didn't go into. Like, you know, I couldn't think of where to squeeze this in, but as of Season 3, you can cancel 5L into Dragon Rush, so, yeah. Definitely keep that in mind. There's other stuff as well, like, one thing you should really make sure you do is defend your ears from this game's terrible fucking English dub. And if you want to know why I say that, you can watch my last video. Check it out, I finally did that cool YouTuber thing where you advertise your previous video at the end of your most recent.
There! But what about the possibility of an aerial attack?